Russia is burning in several regions at once. A hellish detonation, a record strike in the armed forces, a giant arsenal of the Russian Ministry of Defense went up in flames. The Russian army has lost the heart of its reserves. Meanwhile, there's an emergency in Belgorod. An entire region is becoming a disaster zone. The governor is recording emergency addresses. Watch for all the details.
We're bored.
Stagnation. We want some action.
The defense forces of Ukraine once again. Those yachts carried out a series of successful strikes on military targets of the Russian occupation forces. Loud noises were heard in several districts of Volgograd as well as in the sky over the neighboring city of Volжsky. Ukrainian Flamingo missiles successfully reached their target. They hit one of the largest Russian ammunition depots at a Russian Ministry of Defense facility in Kotluban. Local residents heard powerful explosions followed by secondary detonations. In the houses, windows began to shatter and walls started to shake.
To ensure the safety of the civilian population from the threat of detonation during firefighting, an evacuation of residents from the nearby settlement has been announced and is underway. Kotluban. Buses have been prepared and dispatched to carry out the evacuation. Temporary accommodation centers have been set up.
The arsenal's designed capacity can reach up to 264,000 tons of ammunition. In Kotluban, not only was the arsenal of the main missile and artillery directorate of the Russian Ministry of Defense located, but also a military unit. At
2 o'clock in the morning, we were woken up and went to the bunker. At around 3:30, the rockets hit. As for me, I don't know if I'll be able to get back in touch after these messages or not, but the chances are low. And what about charging in the tent? The tents are done for.
After the drone visit, a refinery caught fire right in Volgograd. Lukoil's Volgograd refinery is the largest oil refinery in the southern federal district of the Russian Federation. More than 15 million tons of oil are processed annually. The missile strike on the Volgograd region is already the second attack in the past 2 days. Before that, there was a strike on an oil depot, Zhutovskaya. It is involved in supplying fuel to Russian troops. Things were heated in the Tambov region as well. The Industrial Technological College is on fire. The target of the attack on Michurinsk may have been the Progress plant. The Progress enterprise is about 150 meters from the college. Russian channels only showed the burned-out magnet store but did not specify that it is also located next to this enterprise.
It's burning.
Progress produces equipment for aviation and rocket technology, as well as for gas and oil pipelines. In the Komi Republic, there was quite a commotion at another Russian oil refinery. Residents of Ukhta heard explosions and saw smoke.
They were hit by aircraft-type drones after all.
Here, the oil refinery was on fire. Lukoil Ukhta Oil Refinery. By the way, it's about 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. All these enterprises supply fuel to the Kremlin's war machine. Belgorod, which has been abandoned by the Kremlin leadership and isn't given missiles for air defense, once again received a retaliatory strike for attacks on Ukraine's energy sector.
Living in Belgorod is like playing a game. Right now you have electricity, and then in a moment, no electricity, no heating, no communication. At least there's still water for now, at least that hasn't been taken away.
More than 10 missiles hit the Luch CHP plant, the Frunzensky, Belgorod and Donets electrical substations.
Missile threat. The door is open. The explosion is loud. Wow, that's a loud bang.
The city is once again without electricity and heat, yet residents keep receiving utility bills with huge amounts. This amount is twice as much as the payment for January. And yet, Governor Gladkov promised that charges for undelivered services would not be collected.
Amounts that will either be charged or reversed. We're paid for undelivered services. And together with you, we will definitely monitor this entire process.
Belgorod has been abandoned. Russia has lost major oil and gas enterprises, defense industry plants, and military arsenals. But the Kremlin authorities still want to continue the bloody war.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
It happened. The East shatters the rules. Moscow loses its grip. Putin is cornered. Kazakhstan is suddenly changing its tone and striking at the interests of the Kremlin. Uzbekistan is demonstrating a tough stance. While Moscow is counting on the support of its eastern partners, Turkey and China are starting their own geopolitical game. Details in the report.
Asian countries against Russia's war in Ukraine. Putin's so-called allies are catching and punishing their own citizens who have joined the occupation army.
5 years for participation. Kazakhstan is initiating hundreds of criminal cases against its citizens who went to fight in Ukraine. In
2025, after the I Want to Live project published the personal data of Kazakh citizens participating in the war against Ukraine, Astana launched a large-scale campaign to prosecute Kazakh mercenaries. According to Kazakhstan's judicial statistics, last year law enforcement opened a record 700 cases against those who enlisted in Russian military formations. This figure has increased by dozens of times. In previous years, only a few dozen cases were initiated annually.
Over these years, the Russian Federation has suffered significant losses both in the Central Asian region and in the Middle East and Africa. A very striking example of this is, of course, Armenia. This is also, by the way, the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which was deoccupied by Azerbaijan. This is Kazakhstan, which is gradually distancing itself from Moscow and diversifying its exports.
In such cases, the courts do not care where the accused served. They hand down identical sentences both to Wagner PMC militants and to those who signed contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense. At the same time, Kazakh society, realizing the threat posed by the Russian world, mostly supports Ukraine.
Yes.
Yes. Huh? Huh?
What was that again?
But why exactly?
Asylum?
I'm not really interested in that at the moment.
The countries of Central Asia, which were once part of the USSR, know better than anyone what Russian chauvinism is. Recently, a serious scandal broke out in Uzbekistan. Locals demanded to ban entry into the country for the pro-Putin artist Sergei Bezrukov, all because of his mocking parody of Uzbeks. Those who don't know the Russian language.
It is particularly important to highlight that, beginning with the arrival of the year 2025, the nation of Uzbekistan is set to implement a series of significant changes and new initiatives. This upcoming period marks a major turning point for the country as it prepares to transition into a new phase of development and international cooperation. As we look forward to the future, the strategic decisions being made today in Uzbekistan will undoubtedly shape the landscape of the region for many years to come, reflecting a deep commitment to progress and modernization across all sectors of its society and economy.
They also began to prosecute Uzbeks who participated in crimes against Ukrainians.
An Uzbek citizen who took part in combat on the side of the Russian Federation was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The defendant escaped from the hospital where he was receiving treatment and returned to his homeland.
There, Putin sternly declares that Russia's zone of political influence is expanding wherever there is a Russian soldier, and so on and so forth. In reality, everyone can already see the true strength of the Russian Federation and are working with players who have far more resources and whose positions take the interests of these countries into account much more than the Russian Federation does, which still sees them, as you may recall from the Soviet era, as younger brothers, basically those who are supposed to obey.
For the largest Asian players, the Russian Federation is merely a cheap source of raw materials. After the war began, Turkey, India, and China increased their purchases of energy resources from Russia. And no matter how much Moscow tries to twist the narrative by claiming there are allied relations, in reality, there is nothing even close to a solid alliance. Beijing, in addition to cheap oil and gas, is slowly but surely absorbing Russian regions.
The television said right here, basically, there will be a factory, jobs. There you go, take that, as they say. It's all China. All of this was done for China.
Ankara's cooperation with Moscow is based on cheap raw materials that are advantageous for the Turks. On the issue of the war, President Erdogan takes a clear stance. the Russian Federation must return all occupied territories to Ukraine, including Crimea.
Our support for the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine remains unwavering. The return of Crimea to Ukraine is a requirement of international law.
By betting everything on the war with Ukraine, the Kremlin has lost its former geopolitical influence around the world. Putin's allies are being overthrown in the Middle East. In Syria, they are being hunted down by helicopter landings in South America. And even in Central Asia, a region historically dependent on Moscow, they are turning away from Russia in favor of China, the US, and Europe.
Shock! Russia is being sucked into a vortex of aggression and hatred. Russia is becoming hell for the unwanted. The Kremlin has ordered attack. A domestic manhunt has begun. Russia is swept by a wave of primitive chauvinism that knows no bounds. See the details.
Russia for Russians, for Russian unity. Not so long ago, the Russian authorities used to persecute and even imprison people for such slogans. Now, however, the authorities themselves have adopted these slogans in a new campaign against migrants. I
love Russia and all its people, all its nations. I absolutely will no longer argue with the local population.
The Russian authorities are beginning to discriminate against their own citizens based on their origin, and these citizens are entering into open conflicts with Russians. Recently, a bloody conflict broke out in the Moscow region after a woman was insulted on a bus. A native of Tajikistan got into a confrontation with a group of young men who were insulting her. They got off at a stop and started fighting. At some point, the man pulled out a knife and delivered several blows, which turned out to be fatal. It turned out that the person who was killed was a member of an ultra-right group. In St. Petersburg, security guards at a local shopping center killed a young man because they thought he had stolen something. First, they knocked him out, and then they strangled him. In Odinsovo, people from Azerbaijan attacked and beat up activists from the Healthy Fatherland movement as a crowd. They are free! The Kremlin has found a way to get rid of migrants from Central Asia and replace them with Indians. Some of them were forcibly sent to the front, threatened with deportation. Some wanted to earn money this way.
They're handing out draft notices to the guys, right out in the open air, just like that. It's just complete lawlessness, absolutely outrageous.
They have no legal protection and, in fact, face an even more aggressive form of forced mobilization than ordinary Russians. In the war against Ukraine, it is most often people from Russia's poorest regions who die, with Dagestan and Buryatia leading the statistics. They are dying for Putin's imperial ambitions, as he blames the West for all sins. And so, Yaro wants to unite all the countries that were formerly part of the USSR. If previously Moscow's aggression was directed toward the West and Ukraine, now it is openly spreading to the post-Soviet space.
The key objective is to improve the well-being and quality of life of the citizens of our state.
Putin's puppets can't keep their mouths shut and keep getting caught up in new scandals.
Countries that have become satellites themselves of this collective West, driven mad by liberal fascism. Just look at what's happening there.
Propagandist Solovyov called for a revision of Russia's national doctrine and for another special military operation. But this time in Armenia and other places, as he says, in Russia's spheres of influence. By the way, this event happened after Solovyov received an award from Putin.
They don't care about international law or the international order. If for our national security it was necessary to start a special military operation on the territory of Ukraine, then why, based on the same reasoning, can't we start a special military operation in other places? In points within our sphere of influence.
And this is despite the fact that Armenia is still an ally of Russia in the CSTO, a country that for a long time relied on Russia for security, but step by step is choosing Europe. The Kremlin doesn't like this, which is why the ideology of intimidation is also promoted by other Kremlin talking heads.
It is unacceptable to recognize the existence of a sovereign Armenia or a sovereign Georgia, a sovereign Azerbaijan, a sovereign Kazakhstan, a sovereign Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, or Kyrgyzstan. Nothing sovereign can exist in this new model.
The Armenian Foreign Ministry delivered a note of protest to the Russian ambassador.
It was emphasized that this is an unacceptable infringement on the sovereignty of the Republic of Armenia and a blatant violation of the fundamental principles of friendly relations between Armenia and Russia.
Hand-delivering a formal written note is actually an incredibly significant and serious step. And even if we examine the situation from a broader historical point of view, events of this particular nature have happened only on very rare occasions indeed.
The country's officials couldn't hold back and gave a tough response to people like Solovyov.
Listen, what difference does it make? These propagandists? There's a very good expression in Russian, but I don't want to say it on air. To me, they're both just crap on a stick. To me, there's no difference between them. In
the countries of Central Asia, local politicians also did not ignore Solovyov's words and responded to them very harshly.
Oh, I like how this hysteria has started.
Russia under Putin lives without morals. On a military wave, many jingoistic patriots, Z-bloggers, neo-Nazis, war correspondents, and other media personalities have risen up, making this kind of thing commonplace. Chauvinistic and xenophobic statements. This once again proves that Putin's invasion of Ukraine has normalized a high level of cruelty and aggression in Russia.